Just a reminder to our Speculating Wildly About Crime listeners, this is for entertainment purposes only and solely the thoughts and opinions of our team. We do invite you to sit back, relax, and enjoy the show.
Welcome to Speculating Wildly About Crime. My name is David Keck, and I will be your host for today. As always, joined by the amazing SWACPAK team to speculate along with me. Hello, ladies. So I'm nervous, anxious, excited. I have a couple of questions I want to ask you all first, hopefully to have the wheels turning. So I want to ask, where do you all stand with the death penalty?
Against.
May I ask why?
I am just a firm believer in...
Anyone else?
I'm on the fence because there's so many wrongful convictions. I don't want to have somebody on death row that doesn't deserve to be there. But if it was someone like Ted Bundy or something like that, I don't know, it'd be hard not to put them to death if there's reason. But it's very hard these days with so many wrongful convictions to know if you're gonna put the right person to death.
So I think it's that it has to be 100% correct 100% of the time, and that's just not where we are. Okay, so my second question is, has anyone ever been told that they have a doppelganger or seen their doppelganger?
No. I know as a kid, and I would wear my hair in braided like pigtails. I got Laura Ingalls Wilder a lot.
I can see it.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. Okay.
I had my senior picture my mom had on her desk at work, and someone said that I look like some character from a soap opera. I have no idea. I was like, that would be wonderful. However, I am not.
I used to get Sarah Michelle Gellar.
Oh, yeah. I see that.
Okay, so I'm asking those questions because I did want to know your answers, but I also want you all to keep those questions in the back of your mind as we go through the story that I'm about to give you. I learned a lot from my research with this episode, and Janelle, we're going to come hard for Texas today.
That's okay. I'll come with you.
Oh,
okay.
Any Texans out there, we love you, but I want to throw some facts at you all. In the state of Texas, if a person or persons intentionally or knowingly causes the death of someone, they can and most likely will be convicted of a capital felony and sentenced to death. Texas is the number one state for the death penalty with the highest execution rate. Texas has executed 584 people since 1982. 279 of those were between the years of 2001 and 2014 under the Texas Governor Rick Perry. In 1989, 10 people have been executed in the state of Texas despite evidence for their innocence. Texas is also the number one state with having 363 executions in the last 30 years. Like, that's a lot. All that is going to play a huge factor into this episode. So I want to begin the story by talking about the murder victim, Wanda Lopez. In 1983, Wanda Lopez was stabbed to death by an 8-inch lock blade buck knife, causing her to bleed to death while working her shift at a gas station in Corpus Christi, Texas. Lopez was on the phone with 911 for the second time in the process of reporting a suspicious person. During this call, a man entered the service station, robbed her. That escalated to him stabbing her to death. According to 911, Wanda was cooperating. She was given the money. She was doing everything that she was told. And so it was a little bizarre that It escalated to him stabbing her to death because she was cooperating. Okay, we're going to talk about witnesses. We have a witness named George. At approximately 8 p.m., George stopped at the gas station and stated that he saw a man standing outside. George said the man was playing with a knife and drinking a beer. The man asked George for a ride to a casino, offered to pay him, and was flashing money. George declined, went inside to pay for the gas, and told Wanda, "You probably need to call the police." As George was leaving, he saw the man entering the store, so he did a U-turn and saw that Wanda was struggling. So George went to a nearby bowling alley and had a security guard call the police. George returned to the gas station around the same time that the police was also arriving. Now we also have witness Kevin Baker. Kevin pulled into the gas station, like up to the pump, and then he went inside to have the pump turned on. And he saw Wanda being dragged by her hair to the back of the store.
Was there a time?
It all happened around 8:00 p.m.
So she called the police twice, and she was on the phone with police while she was being robbed.
Correct.
Okay, I wanted just to clarify.
Correct. Kevin Baker was also noticed by the attacker. The assailant left the store facing Kevin, stating, "I have a gun, back off." Baker gave the direction that the assailant then took off to, but it was found in later reports that there were discrepancies on the direction he was running, okay? Baker states that Wanda Lopez staggered outside of the building. The next set of witnesses we have is John and Julia Arzaga. They were pulling into a nightclub where they both saw a Hispanic man jogging east from the gas station. Police found Carlos DeLuna within an hour of the crime, and he was found just a few blocks from the gas station. DeLuna was hiding underneath a car in a puddle of water. He had no shoes, no shirt. This also was happening in February, which was very cold. So why would Carlos be hiding under a car in water, no shoes, and no shirt? Once Carlos was placed under arrest, the arresting officers takes Carlos back to the gas station for the witnesses to identify him. Have you all ever heard of this?
Like a police lineup, but not in a police station?
Yeah, they found him. The witnesses were still at the crime scene at the gas station. They put him in the car and they drive him back to the crime scene for witnesses to peek in the window and say, yes, that was him. Have you all heard that before?
No.
Isn't that,
Seen it on a few TV shows, but
yeah.
I wonder if this has anything to do with the size of their police force, or I know you're gonna get into it, but
I do think all those things play a factor, absolutely. And yes, you're right. We will get more into that. But yes, I think that we have said this on a lot of our episodes, is how much experience does someone have with the case that they're dealing with?
I'm sorry, can you remind me of the year this was again?
83. So Kevin Butler, one of the witnesses, identified Carlos as the man he saw attacking Wanda. There are actual police photos of the witnesses looking in the car at Carlos and saying,
they're like looking in the car. I thought
That's-
maybe they had him like outside in the parking lot or something. That's awful.
that's bananas. That's
regardless, then like he can see them versus
Yeah, there's no protection if he is this hardened criminal. Now he's seen all the witnesses too.
that
And I'm
was not
guessing
a-
this is also after dark. So, like,
Yeah.
where they have the dome light of the police car on.
So once the police get Carlos to the jailhouse, he tells the cops that he did not do this, but that he knows who did. And then he stops talking. There was no attorneys present. He's being accused of murder. He said, I didn't do this, and he stopped talking. This is being used as a sign of guilt. A few witnesses identified DeLuna the night of, and some actually identified him at the trial as the man they saw running from the gas station. But let's talk about the descriptions that were given. We have witnesses that have stated the assailant was unshaved and in a flannel shirt. A witness also stated the assailant was wearing either blue pants and a long sleeve t-shirt or dark pants and a white t-shirt with sleeves rolled up. George, one of the witnesses, identified DeLuna that evening as the man he saw playing with a knife, but DeLuna was not wearing a white shirt and he didn't have a knife on him. Let's also note that George was not asked to identify DeLuna in the actual trial. So then we also have witnesses, John and Julie. They stated the man they saw running from the direction of the gas station was Hispanic and in an untucked white dress shirt with sleeves rolled up with dark pants. They both did identify DeLuna at the trial as the man they saw running from the gas station. James Lawrence, the attorney, says that Carlos did have a troubled past with the cops, but this was a crime that wasn't the typical crime for him. His criminal past was petty theft, robbery, slap on the wrist crimes. We do have a couple of different stories from Carlos himself that came about during the investigation. The first story he says is that he was not there and has an alibi. The alibi is questioned, and she says that his statement is not true, that she is 7.5 months pregnant and was at a baby shower being held in her honor. The second story, Carlos states that he was across the street from the gas station and noticed the attack and ran because he knew the attacker and was scared to say anything, and then gave the name Carlos Hernandez. Carlos Hernandez was born on July 14th, 1954 in Corpus Christi, Texas, and was raised in a 2-bedroom apartment with his 5 siblings and parents who divorced in 1960 due to his father's conviction of rape. Carlos and his brother were placed in a local institution for use as his mother could not support them. Probation officers noted that his time in the institution impacted him negatively and that he dropped out of school at the age of 16. As a juvenile, Hernandez was charged with negligent homicide. Hernandez had been driving a car of his sister's boyfriend and later admitted to drinking alcohol at the time of the accident. Both his sister and her boyfriend were in the car. His sister was injured and the boyfriend died. While Hernandez was initially charged with excessive speeding and driving while under the influence, he was ultimately placed on probation. Hernandez was arrested 39 times. 13 of those times, he had a particular knife. Now that Carlos DeLuna has mentioned the name and told his attorneys about Carlos Hernandez, they begin a search for Hernandez. DeLuna states that they got to know each other while they were in jail together. DeLuna's attorneys pulled mugshots of Carlos Hernandez, every Carlos Hernandez in that area, and they could not find the one that DeLuna insisted killed Wanda. So these dead ends questioned, did Carlos Hernandez even exist? Two attorneys represented DeLuna at the trial. Hector D. Pina Jr. was one of the attorneys. He had never presented a criminal defendant in front of a jury with this serious of charge. So the judge also appointed a seasonal criminal defense attorney, Jimmy Lawrence, to serve as first chair. DeLuna took the stand in his own defense, and if you all don't have anything to ask or say before, I will read his statement. But I want to give you all a chance to ask questions.
You said that this Carlos Hernandez might not have ever existed.
Well, they're not finding any evidence of him. There's no mugshots. Like the attorneys were taking all these pictures of every Carlos Hernandez they could find within a mile radius, and they were like presenting them to Carlos DeLuna, saying, "Point out who he is." He went through all these pictures, and none of them were Hernandez.
Do you know if he provided any additional information that would help the attorneys narrow down the mugshots, or is it just, oh, it's Carlos Hernandez? Sure, yeah.
There were a bit of clues that were mentioned, but put a pin.
Okay.
Yeah, and back in the 80s, they wouldn't have had the database, computer database to search from. So it probably was literally a book of mugshots or whatever.
They could have forgotten to include a couple. Just saying.
Is that police corruption, Jamie? Or
Jamie is going.
Never.
I even have it highlighted in a certain color of where Jamie is going to get so excited about this.
Am I gonna have to let Jamie win this week?
Well, maybe. And
But-
sometimes it is people of authority abuse their power.
How big is your island this week, Jamie? We're gonna have to find out.
I mean,
Janelle
it's
might be taking a stop at it today.
pretty small, so y'all have to bring your lifeboats because you never come with me. So the water's coming up.
She is not prepared for guests.
Okay, so I do want to say that a lot of the notes that I previously read are from multiple resources. Going forward, I'm going to get heavy into the documentary, The Phantom. I want to read you the testimony of Carlos DeLuna while on trial. He says that he spent the early evening with two female friends. A man named Carlos Hernandez approached them. Although DeLuna did not originally recognize Hernandez until after speaking with him, he then realized that they actually knew each other from childhood. DeLuna testified that he was wearing a blue shirt, black pants, and black slip-on shoes. DeLuna and Hernandez went to a bar named Wolfie's, located directly across the street from the Shamrock gas station. Hernandez said he was going over to the Shamrock to buy something, so DeLuna ordered a beer at Wolfie's and waited. DeLuna began wondering why Hernandez was taking so long, so he stepped outside Wolfie's to see what was going on. DeLuna could see across the street into the Shamrock and observed Hernandez attacking Lopez. Worried that people might think that he was involved with Hernandez, DeLuna started walking away. When DeLuna heard sirens, he started running. He testified that his shirt was ripped clean from his body while climbing a fence. On cross-examination, DeLuna was asked about the white t-shirt and shoes that were found in a nearby yard, and he testified that they were not. DeLuna admitted that he was a twice convicted felon and that he had lied to his psychiatrist who examined him. Admitted he was unable to identify Carlos Hernandez from his mugshot. The prosecution offered rebuttal evidence to show that one of the girls that DeLuna claimed to have been with that evening, Mary Ann, was actually attending her own baby shower. 2, DeLuna lied about his whereabouts that afternoon to his parole officer. After deliberating for 4 hours, the jury convicted DeLuna of capital murder. At the penalty phase, the prosecution introduced evidence that DeLuna had committed 2 attempted rapes. The prosecution called Juanita Garcia the mother of DeLuna's best friend. DeLuna attempted to rape her just 2 days after his release from prison on an earlier conviction for attempted rape, breaking 3 of Garcia's ribs. This incident caught DeLuna's lawyers by surprise, since he had only been charged with misdemeanors and assault in this incident, so they did not have a chance to actually investigate it. The jury deliberated again for 6 hours and deciding that DeLuna was likely to reoffend, and so the judge sentenced him to death. DeLuna was offered life in prison with the possibility of parole, but Carlos DeLuna rejected this, stating that he was innocent. This is going to be where I start hitting the documentary pretty hard. We meet a very, at the time, green reporter. She was brand new. Her name was Karen. She was assigned to the case, and this was her very first case. She was asked to go to the death row to speak to Carlos DeLuna. And she said that she had the mental mindset of Carlos, this is just a story to her. He is a murderer. She was not going to have compassion, sympathy, or empathy. But after actually talking to him, Carlos begins to tell her that he had been begging for a lot of Tetra tests, but it's always been rejected. He was also letting her know that he keeps mentioning Carlos Hernandez, but there's been no investigation. Carlos was constantly writing Karen letters that began to have her question the investigation and his guilt. And she was starting to worry because he has an execution date.
I don't know really anything about this case, and I'm really not sure where you're leading us, because you've been very mysterious about how we're supposed to end up feeling at the end. But right now, it's hard for me. Okay, if Carlos DeLuna did not do this thing, which he is on death row for, which I'm assuming that is the end of this, I'm still really pissed off at him that he saw his drinking buddy attacking somebody and chose to run away instead of helping.
But you don't have prior charges. And so somebody who is afraid of going back to jail is not going to implicate themselves with anything to do with the police at all.
I'm going to have a hard time with this one. The sympathy factor, I might not get it. So just have some leeway with me.
This is exactly what I wanted. I wanted us to be on the fence at this time, because that's going to be what proves that point, right? This is what the jury was thinking. This is what his lawyers were thinking. This is what Karen, the news reporter, was thinking. You were this close to it, but you had nothing to do with it. But you were found under a car and you have this history.
Maybe this is something that I just picked words and making my own story up, but I thought originally he said, I met this Carlos Hernandez guy in jail, and that's how I knew him. But then he later went on to say, I knew him from childhood. So you're already contradicting yourself, and that's where I'm dipping my toe in the water, because I'm like, bro, you can't even keep that story straight. It's a little
Maybe there was
concerning.
more than one.
I know
think
all the Carlos Hernandezes.
I think it's so much easier to be a I don't know what you call it, like a likable suspect, than the opposite, where you're not necessarily a likable person, but you actually did not do this crime that is going to potentially end your life.
It's like the Kevin and the Kayla Berg, right? Like he was a likable suspect, but if he didn't do it, he still wasn't a likable person. So
Like we've said pretty much in every case, so many things can be true at one time. You can be a bad person, but that doesn't mean you murdered somebody. I'm glad that we are where we are right now with this, because that's where I was hoping we would be. Like I wanted to try to calculate.
Morality edge of a cliff.
That's okay.
Thanks, David. Thanks.
Okay, so the attorneys were hoping to at least delay the execution, but unfortunately, the execution extension was not granted. During this time, the attorneys came across several pictures that had never been seen before of the scene of the crime. It was showing cops like walking through blood, creating their tracks through blood. The crime scene was not handled correctly, so the lawyers were hoping to at least get an extension based on this as not a fair trial, but again, it was denied. December 7th, 1989, we are at Death House in Huntsville, Texas. And this is where the executions are held at midnight. They would transfer the person from death row to the death house where the chamber is located. The detective that there was one detective that believed that Carlos was innocent, and in the documentary he said that all optimism was sucked out of him at this point, that all he could do was go to his office with a bottle of scotch and wait on the phone call that Carlos was dead. At 10:50 p.m., the phone rang. The Department of Corrections called asking Karen, the reporter, to accept a call from Carlos. So she did. She accepted it. And she asked Carlos if he had anything to say. And all Carlos could say is that he was scared and that the state of Texas was going to execute an innocent man. And it's crazy to watch. In the documentary, Karen was asking, what do you say to a man that is going to be dead in less than 2 hours? She even said in the documentary that she asked Carlos on the phone, is there anything that you want to say, hoping that this would give him the chance to say, you know what, I did it. But he couldn't say that. And through tears, all he could say is that he was scared. But he ended the call saying that he knew that he was going to go to heaven. Carlos also called his brother, and his brother asked him, Carlos, did you do this? And Carlos said that it was Carlos Hernandez and that it was not him. Carlos DeLuna assured his brother, you know who Carlos Hernandez is. And the call ended. The line was disconnected. I will say, watching the documentary, it sounded as if, because calls are monitored, it could be editing, it could be whatever, but what the documentary made it look like is this last phone call to his brother was being monitored, too much information was giving, and it was shut off. Carlos's mother is there, and she was also at the execution. And even at the time of the recording of the documentary, she was saying, I had to be there for him. I know that he's done bad things, but he didn't do this. So they bring Carlos in, they strap him to the bed, and fast forwarding a little bit, 14 years later, we are introduced in the documentary to a professor named James Lebanon. He's with the Columbia Law School, and He's done research on the Phantom. His classes have done research on Carlos Hernandez and Carlos DeLuna, and as part of the documentary The Phantom. So he's flipping through files and he's discussing things that had not been discovered until he hired a PI to go to Texas and investigate this Carlos Hernandez. The PI called Jim, the professor, and said, I found him, and he is the absolute doppelganger of Carlos Luna. So I want to show you all the side-by-side mugshots. So looking at this, think back to the witnesses, right? Like, the witnesses are in the heat of the moment. They have also been traumatized. They're peeking through a dark cop car, shoulders up, of a person. Like, they look alike.
And the witnesses were not Hispanic, right? Or we don't know?
Names of the witnesses, I would guess not.
Because there's research, and I'm probably going to say this incorrectly, but there's research that says that's why everybody looks the same, right? When you cross
Right.
race lines, you can't distinguish certain features, especially if these people, if the witnesses were not Hispanic. I'm assuming these two men are, and I hope Hispanic is the right term, but
Yes.
so that they would look similar enough, especially if you were not of that same ethnicity of them.
But about looking at these guys, that's why I asked you all the question in the beginning of like the whole doppelganger question, because those were the exact words that this PI used when he was like, I found pictures.
I don't think they look that similar though. I'm really good with faces though, not so much names, but faces. But I don't think they
From
Yeah,
a
I can
distance-
definitely pick out some differences, but again, we're seeing these up close.
You're right.
You know what I mean? And we're not peering into a window and then comparing it to somebody else.
With the trauma also involved. And you got to think too, we want those answers, right? Like, we want someone to
Yeah,
tell
we say that all the time.
that guy's caught. If you've seen this horrific stabbing that led to someone passing and you were trying to resuscitate, and within an hour they're like, oh, this is the guy, we caught him.
Corpus Christi, I would assume that it is like the majority of the population is Hispanic. It's not like you're saying, oh, it's easy for me to say, yeah, that's the guy because he's Hispanic. It's most people there are Hispanic.
At least one detective that I know of that was working the case was also Hispanic.
So that's why I think we can't put it on
But
that situation.
100%. But with that
I mean,
also being said, the witnesses were not all Hispanic.
If this
Okay.
was in somewhere where that was not the case, then I could absolutely see that being a possibility, but not in Corpus.
And with the couple that saw him running from the scene, my question to that is, were they running towards you and away from the scene, or just you saw half the back of them, half the side of them, even if they were just across the street of the same race, perhaps? Gosh, I don't know. At night when it's dark, half of a person, and then you have to look through some sort of a tinted window. Yeah, they got black hair.
And you got to think too, witnesses were on their way to a bowling alley, which, granted, this is speculating, but I love to bowl, but I drink when I do it. You know what I mean? There's a bar in there.
Aiming
Two
fluid,
of
right?
the witnesses were from a bar.
Right.
You know, like there was, and maybe it's not even a whole like drunken, irresponsible kind of thing, but some of the witnesses like they were open about going to a bar.
To Dana's point, I wrote that comment down too. People can fucking run. It's not against the law to run. What if it was just some Hispanic guy getting his workout on and now we're pinning him on a murder because he happened to be running through a neighborhood where a crime happened? That eyewitness account was just bullshit to me. I didn't even write down the rest of the facts because I was like, oh, you saw a guy run.
I think it was the fact that he was found hiding under a car.
No. But that had nothing to do with a guy running. Like these people said,
The
oh yeah, we saw a
witnesses.
guy running down the road at this time. And then later this guy was found in a car. Nobody connected that was the same person.
The police did, obviously, or they wouldn't
Oh, the
be
police
asking.
did.
I think that's what's so difficult about this one too, and it's such a situational problem with how the police handled this,
Mhm.
because taking witness statements in general are problematic.
Right.
In situations, there's a lot of factors that go into witnesses being able to accurately identify somebody. And we have the factors of the trauma, it's a traumatic situation. If any of them were drinking, like David pointed out, it's dark out, so that's also a problem. And then you have the cops literally saying, oh, come to this police window. Just the psychology of that is somebody is detained in the back of a police car, you're automatically going to, whether you're meaning to do that or not, your mind can go there. Okay, yeah, no, that does look like the guy, and this must be him because the police have him in the back of their car. Like,
Yep.
it's so problematic the way the police did this.
Well, do you know anything about their respective weights or heights?
Their structure, their height, their appearance, as far as if you were given a description of someone, he's 5'11", brown hair, brown eyes, 150 pounds, all that is matching.
I'd also I feel like I would hate to not point this out, but this is all giving me Lacey Peterson eyewitness vibes when she was out walking the dog, which was in the middle of the day with a bunch of neighbors that saw her. So the fact that now it's at night, it's at a potentially alcohol is involved. So I just wanted to throw that out there because that's where my mind is going, is to
100%.
everybody discounts the neighbors with Lacey Peterson. So now all of a sudden we're like, yep, these eyewitnesses, they got it down pat.
100%. These people witnessed someone bleeding out and dying. So the trauma that's going to have on them, how that's going to change their memory, and just need to put my head down tonight knowing that there's no bad guy out there, I think would play a factor in that too.
And
So-
so back to like them being in the police car, or assuming that the person in the police car is guilty, it's the same reason why when they have the defendant sitting at the table in the court, why they don't have them in the orange jumpsuit, because then you already go, oh, they're already arrested, even though they are when they're sitting there in their suit, but it's not an orange jumpsuit or black and white striped suit.
So do they, and again, I know nothing about this case, so I'm coming in 100% blind. But is most of the trial and the conviction based on eyewitness accounts?
I was just about to ask that, Jamie.
So there's no evidence. So
I'll touch on that a little bit more, but you're on the right path. Absolutely.
so that drives me crazy because it's a he said, she said. It's like your mom giving you an alibi. I think it's all kind of bullshit.
David, how much did his previous crimes play a role in his conviction? Like, how much was that brought in to this case?
There wasn't a lot of talk about that. I guess the best way to answer that is he's dead. They executed him. I guess that would be the best answer.
And I think given their evidence, it probably was hard to say it wasn't him. If you have, especially in '89, when we weren't used to watching CSI and all of those things, If all you're presented with is, hey, all these people say they saw you running, they saw you do it, and you're a bad person, add
Yeah.
that in, there's probably not a lot in their minds. They still probably convicted the right person.
Was sentencing still separate then? Maybe they didn't necessarily know he was going to get the death penalty.
Usually it's, at least nowadays, usually that it's at least on the table when you
Yeah, I think
find them guilty.
Yeah, I think in the state of Texas, like
Oh, I forget that we're in Texas.
Was there any mention of Brady violations at all with the photos not being available to the attorneys?
not that I found.
Okay.
There were things that came to surface before the execution, but even more came out after, and then it's too late, right? But
Were Brady violations a thing in the 80s?
Yeah, they came about, I believe, in 1966.
Okay.
okay, Dana.
Get it, Dana?
Carolina, she's coming for your job.
I'm sorry, 1963.
fine.
I apologize.
That is fine.
That's
I do think that, well, I do know that all these questions are relevant. And again, like, I'm so glad that we're having these because I wanted to present this for this because I was afraid that when I recited my resources and said all these things in the beginning, that we would all have our minds made up. So I'm glad that we're all like tug of war in right now.
David, this case is making me real mad.
Oh God, she's
Like-
gonna leave me off Facebook again.
Do you have another bottle of champagne?
I'm already feeling anxious, conflicted. I'm not gonna any way that this whole situation wraps itself up.
It already wrapped up badly. This
I
is
mean,
where
it's sad, right?
I wouldn't believe in the death penalty, because if there's any ambiguity, then that's where it should be a life sentence then, at least.
Yeah.
It
And
wasn't even a fucking fair trial, and we're offing the guy.
And I do want to say too, you all know I'm very vocal of where I stand with like mental health and sexual assault and things like that. I won't get into it. I think at this point we all know. What I want to say is the sentencings that he had previously of the things that we are against, he did his time. He served his sentence and he did his time. That does not justify the act. However, by the court of law, he was given a certain amount of time and he did that.
So we need to separate things. Like, if somebody commits this crime and they paid their time for that, that is done. It may make them a good person or a bad person, but we can't label them with this thing forever, right?
I think it's also, unfortunately, I don't want to say the majority, possibly the majority of offenders reoffend.
100%.
Yeah, there's all the
Sure.
recidivism, but part of that is because we are not rehabilitating them in jail,
Right.
right?
Absolutely.
Say it louder
all
for the
we're
people in the
doing-
back, please.
Yes, all we're doing in jail is teaching them
I-
to be better criminals in most cases.
I
Because
agree. It's just an endless cycle, and
yeah,
I'm not trying to defend anything at all because I know it's a fucking disaster, but
no,
I'm
I
just,
agree with you too.
I'm
Still
just
need to know.
saying you shouldn't get like a key to the city just because you served
Yeah.
your 2 years.
That was not at all what I'm saying, but I think so many times they almost use a prior conviction as like evidence. And I'm like, but we need to treat them as separate cases,
Well,
right?
that's why I was wondering how much that got brought into the courtroom for this particular case.
I think we're all saying the same things. We're just saying it in different ways.
Yep,
Mhm.
I don't think this is a debate of any kind, and possibly part of a different phase of where you are in the guilty verdict. We are now going to meet a few of Carlos Hernandez's people. So there is a girlfriend named Maggie. Maggie was a teenager sitting outside of her house one day. She sees Hernandez, thought he was handsome. And Hernandez asked, "Why are you not in school?" He thought she should be in school. And she said, "I can't, I'm pregnant." So they began dating and immediately moved in together. Margie says that at this point in her life, she cannot even go past that house because it scares her. She was locked in rooms of the house. She was beaten and she was raped. She, at one point, was able to call and confess to her sister what he was doing and that she was afraid to leave. But her sister forced her to leave. Now, keep in mind, I'm in documentary reference. So I'm flipping back and forth. It was the easiest, best way that I knew to do this. We're back to Professor Jim. And he is tracking the criminal record that consists of the violence of women, the knife, the robbery of the gas stations. Hernandez was arrested 20 to 30 times, and the photos show that there was a buck knife in every evidence photo, which is the same type of knife that was used to kill Wanda. So the buck knife is a very important thing to remember. So then we meet another girlfriend of Carlos Hernandez, and her name is Diana Gomez. She says that she began dating Carlos, and one night he was restless and began to talk about a woman he picked up in a van. He had sex with her, and then he strangled her until her eyes rolled to the back of her head. He then says how he flipped her over on her stomach and carved an X into her back. Carlos Hernandez's underwear was found at the scene of the crime, as well as a beer can with his DNA. So a man named Jesse Garza was charged with the crime. Carlos Hernandez was never convicted of this crime. Luckily, Jesse was found innocent. I would like to say the woman that was murdered, her name was Dahlia Salzda. This attack in the van with Dahlia, it happened 4 years before Wanda Lopez was murdered. The cops knew who Carlos Hernandez was and that he actually had murdered before. But when his name was mentioned by Carlos DeLuna, the cops that were actually part of the investigation of Dahlia's death spoke as if Carlos Hernandez didn't exist.
David, was he like a CI or something?
Pin. So
It was your pins.
I'm going to hit you with the pin.
We have a whole pin cushion at this point.
I'll
Just
tell you.
held in.
Tell you what to do with your pins.
It was officially proven that he was not one of the Carlos Hernandez photos that they brought to DeLuna, correct?
Yes. Truly all the photos that were presented to DeLuna, none of them were Hernandez. Now we meet Dina. She is also a victim who luckily survived of Hernandez. He stabbed her while bragging about killing Wanda and a lady named Dahlia. Hernandez actually made fun of DeLuna for being prosecuted for the crime that he himself committed. There are multiple witnesses that states Carlos Hernandez had bragged and confessed at least just the murder to Wanda. Professor Jim says there was only a 40-minute manhunt for the murder of Wanda. There was camera and police evidence, but all that was presented in the trial of DeLuna was the police call made by Wanda Lopez, the initial 911 call. The 911 dispatcher that took the call parroted the call and kept it for herself on record and gave it to Professor Jim. This allowed the calls regarding the case to be tracked minute by minute. The recorded dispatch calls state different descriptions of the suspect. One says t-shirt, one says flannel shirt, some say clean shaven. None of the descriptions actually really mirrored each other. So now in the documentary, we meet a witness by the name of Raymond. And he said, and I quote, Raymond kills me. He said, "I was watching Jaws and I heard a ruckus. So I looked out the window and saw a man hiding under my van and another man running." So when you hear the recording of the cop talking about a man jumping over the fence at the nursing home, this is when Carlos DeLuna was being found under the truck in the puddle of water. This is how all that's connected, right? So they found Carlos at this time under the truck and they placed him in the police car. Again, I'm kind of repeating myself a little bit, but they take him to the scene of the crime to have him identified by the witnesses. And it's on records of the cops saying, "All right, we got the guy, we're done." And even the owner of the store that was robbed was questioning this, or no, it's not this easy. It can't be done this easily. So as Jim investigates people, and as people were also being asked about this Carlos Hernandez and how he has gotten away with so many murders, and the fact that others, not just DeLuna, but another man had even been arrested for murdering somebody that Hernandez had actually murdered. Some people say and believe that Carlos Hernandez was known to the police as an informant. Of course, the police deny this. Carlos Hernandez died at age 44 on May 6th, 1999 from cirrhosis of the liver. He was in jail at the time of his death for attacking the neighbor with a knife. And so now we meet a man in the documentary by the name of Carol Pickett, and he is the prison chaplain and the one that was with Carlos DeLuna up into the execution. So Carlos DeLuna was telling the chaplain, "I want to write letters, but I'm afraid it won't make it to the people that I'm writing to." And the chaplain said, "I'm with you today. Write the letters. I'll put them in my pocket and I'll make sure they get to where they need to go." Carlos DeLuna told the chaplain, "I've never had a father. Today's my last day on earth. Can I just call you my dad?" And the chaplain allowed this. The chaplain also then describes the execution. The chaplain said that he was with him from 9 a.m. to 11 p.m. The chaplain walked DeLuna to the death house, and once DeLuna was strapped to the bed, and that's when the 3 injections were injected. The first injection is supposed to put you to sleep. It didn't work. DeLuna raised his head, looked at the chaplain, and tried to speak. The chaplain was saying in the documentary how he couldn't make sense of what he was saying, but that he just really wished he knew what DeLuna was trying to say. DeLuna lays his head back down. The second injection then started, and this is the one that's supposed to paralyze you, but it didn't work. And he raised up again. The third injection is supposed to paralyze the heart. And this injection was starting to enter the veins of DeLuna and eventually started to work. And the chaplain, all he could say was, "This is one of Texas' biggest mistakes." The chaplain states that Texas likes to kill people to show that killing people is wrong. But what if they're innocent? Carlos DeLuna has never received a formal pardon. What do you all think? What's your speculations?
One thing I thought was a little funny was, or coincidental, that he knew the person. So if DeLuna, right, knew Hernandez, and then Hernandez just happened to be running by while DeLuna was in a puddle. So that part's a little weird, but I do think it was Hernandez that did everything, not DeLuna. But it's a little weird that they still knew each other and happened to be roughly in the same spot. If people saw Hernandez instead of DeLuna, but then they picked up DeLuna.
And if you'll remember, in that confession on trial, he had mentioned that they were out together and that Hernandez went across the street to the gas station and he got a drink at the bar.
Then why was he shirtless without shoes in a puddle? But just that part just seems weird, but I don't think he did it. That would be, and again, that's why I said with too many wrongful convictions, why the death penalty doesn't seem applicable in most situations. There are very few that it might be, but this is obviously one that should not have happened.
My complete speculation is perhaps they were out together that night, but rather than grabbing a drink, it was, want to make $50, $100 easy, we can go rob this gas station. And maybe that was the pretense that they went out with. So I could see DeLuna maybe staying outside, and that was perhaps a person that one of the witnesses saw outside. And then Hernandez went inside, and I don't have any speculation of how it went from maybe just a robbery to a stabbing incident. And then I could see them both fleeing, or if DeLuna did see that Hernandez was inside committing this crime, saying, I was okay robbing $50 from this store, not with murder. So he could have fled prior to that, and could be why one was scaling a fence and one was found under the car. And the police, I could see being like, works for me.
Carolina, you got a thing?
I have a lot of thoughts on this, and I'm going to try to keep them concise because I think we've speculated throughout and talked about a lot of these things throughout. But I think regardless of whether DeLuna was the actual perpetrator of this murder, there was not enough to convict him at the end of the day for his trial. Seemingly, it was all based on all of these witness statements, which witness statements are, I said this earlier, problematic in and of themselves. And then we have a lot of other factors of it being dark out, them picking up DeLuna, putting him in the back of a police car, having the witnesses peer through a police car window to identify him. They're not even seeing him in a standing position, which is how they would have seen him running down the street. That's all problematic. So I think regardless of whether he did it, there was not enough evidence to convict him of this. I don't think the murder weapon was ever found. Am I correct in saying that?
Correct, yes.
So there was no other actual evidence other than these witnesses, multiple of them pinpointing DeLuna as the actual person. And the fact that there was another potential suspect in the mix of all of this, I think leads to enough reasonable doubt that he should not have been convicted and not have received the death penalty for this. Another point, I think that DeLuna, and I think we touched on this and talked about this throughout, he can be a bad actor in other ways and not have committed this murder and should have been convicted of this murder. And I'd be really interested to like read the trial transcript for this one, because typically, at least now, and I know this was back in like the 80s, typically now it's difficult to bring in those past crimes into a trial just because it's so prejudicial to the defendant to actually bring those in. Now, he testified in his trial, which gives a little more leeway of impeaching his testimony. So that would be interesting to see. But I think we can't say just because he did all of these other bad things and was convicted, and certainly he probably did all of those things, that he actually committed this murder. I think it's a very unfortunate situation at the end of all of this, and I think this is where the problem with the death penalty comes in, especially for people that support the death penalty. And obviously it's a very hot topic issue, but for those that support it, it's hard to grapple with cases like this, where there's so little evidence against somebody and they ended up losing their life at the end of it and facing the death penalty. So I don't know who I think did it, but I don't think that this was a fair trial, and he probably should not have been convicted.
Janelle, do you have thoughts?
My thoughts are, so even at the end of all of this, we still don't have anything definitive, right? There's no confession from Hernandez.
DeLuna's dead. That's pretty definitive.
But as far as the who actually committed this crime, we still don't know anything. We have,
other than the
we have faulty tests
witnesses that confess to him bragging of his.
So, but at the end of the day, how is that any more credible than the eyewitnesses from the gas station? It's all hearsay or potentially faulty eyewitness statements. There's no smoking gun here. I don't believe he should have gotten the death penalty. I feel like this documentary was a narrative, yes, about this crime, but also on the death penalty. And so I feel like it could have swayed a certain way, but there's nothing like on record, on paper, on written in stone that either one of them was guilty or not. That's where I'm struggling here. You did a great job tonight, David, but I still don't know.
I think that's the point, is if we don't know, why is he dead?
Correct.
Should maybe he be in prison until we find out the answers?
Absolutely.
But you're dead.
You asked at the start of this episode about the death penalty, and I could not even put it into words because I don't really know how I feel about it. It makes me uncomfortable to even think about it. I don't know. I'm frustrated about the whole system. Back to Dana's point, I find it really hard to believe that DeLuna had nothing to do with anything nefarious that was happening. If Hernandez if he was a CI and they knew that he was just all around town murdering people, what was he CIing about that was worse than that? Like
drugs. Not that it's worse than that, but
so we're just gonna let you go all around
town. One life versus 100. I don't know.
Did these people that came forward to tell their personal stories about him, was that during the trial? Was that afterwards? Was that before the trial? Was that, I think that depends too, because it's easy to tell your story like at an appropriate time, but
some told, I think it also played into the fact of it's a small town that was gang related, and most of them were women who were single moms that was living in poverty and fearing everything. And once they found that, okay, this person's locked up, he's dead of cirrhosis of the liver, I can now say what I know because I feel safe. I think that there's so many factors that play into each individual story of small town gang related fear.
So goes back to, we talk about all the time how not more than one person can keep a secret, right? And to David's point that he just talked about, maybe now that we feel safe, now we can let the secret out.
Yeah, it's on record as public record. This one person spoke up, and now there's power in numbers. I feel safe to speak up. Is that what you're saying?
Mm-hmm. And because he's dead, so he can't hurt me anymore.
they're both dead. So
No, but
it's,
I guess I'm saying that on the assumption that DeLuna is innocent.
but imagine if those people had come forward before he was executed.
I was going to say this until the last of my closing. Even in our lifetime, I know of people that have been on death row for how long? What do you think the common death row year number is?
Think of Darlie Routier.
She's been there a long time. Yeah.
Long time. Okay, David, tell me how long he was on death row. You're going to say 4 days.
6 years. 20 years is the average number for Texas death row. He was 6 years.
Yep, they have the express lane for killing people.
Cindy, that's where Darlie is.
And of course, there are those one-offs, right?
Many things case. Okay, first and foremost, like I think it's unpopular opinion maybe in this group, but I am 1,000,000% against the death penalty up to Ted Bundy. I didn't even think Ted Bundy should have been killed. I think everybody that is born into this life has a purpose to live their life up until the point that they don't anymore. And when I say they don't anymore, I don't think that you should come in and interfere with that, because it's twofold. Number one, I don't think anybody should decide who's going to die. And number two, okay, yeah, Ted Bundy killed a lot of people, but how are you any better by killing him? You're a murderer too. And I know that opens up a whole lot of other speculation, but that is the preface for where my soapbox is going to be. Number one, I don't think anybody should be on death row for anything, to be honest with you. Number two, I'm gonna grab points from everybody, I feel like, but when Carolina was talking about, we've got nothing. We have no evidence. We have witness accounts, and bad witness accounts at that. We didn't even bring him to the police station. We went into a gas station parking lot, and that's where we did all of our witness accounts. What the hell kind of shit is that? It's the 1983 of it all, but that's awful, right? That's not okay. So that's number two. Number three is, and I will get on this boat with you, David, because I'm never going to have an episode where I don't have this a little bit, but Carlos Hernandez was definitely an informant. He definitely was working for the police. I think, and I said it early on in this episode, I think it's super sketch that they had all these other Carlos Hernandezes, and DeLuna was like, no, y'all motherfuckers knew you were not putting his picture out there. You knew that. You were hiding that picture on purpose. So I think that's shit. And there's probably a lot to unpack there, and there's a lot to uncover there, and for another podcast maybe, but there's something there where the police were definitely defending him to a point and weren't letting everything out. I will go back to, there's some weird shit about DeLuna though. I'll go back to my point of, did you meet him in your childhood or did you meet him in jail? Why were you under a car with none of your clothes on? Why did you say you were with him for part of the time? So then I can get on Dana's island and say, I think you probably had something to do with it, but you probably didn't want somebody dead. I just get so angry at so many pieces of this. I hate every ounce of the eyewitness accounts. I think they're all garbage. I think we can roll them all up into a big fucking ball and light it on fire. I don't like any of it on both sides. Even because I feel like if I'm going to say the eyewitness accounts of I saw this guy on the day of are garbage, I also have to say my boyfriend did this, they're also garbage, right? I hate eyewitness accounts. Where is the knife? Where is the blood? Where, if you stabbed somebody or strangled somebody or whatever, there's something at that scene that can tie you to that crime. And the cops fucked it up, and they probably fucked it up on purpose because they're like, oh, this guy killed her. We can't have him go to jail because he's our fucking informant. So how can we fuck it up? Let's trounce through here. Let's do this. Let's do that. So I don't know. I guess I go back and forth, but I will probably land back on my island for the most part and saying he was invaluable to the police. They did not want to peg this crime on him. So they found ways to make that okay. But at the end of the day, every person that is convicted of, or not convicted of a crime, that is charged with a crime deserves a fair trial. DeLuna didn't get a fair trial. He didn't. He just didn't. And then we killed him. That's just not okay in my book. I'm legitimately going to have a hard time going to bed tonight hearing about this case. I've never heard about it before. And it sits bad in my stomach. And that's the most non-answer I've ever given in any of these, but I just don't know.
What about you, David?
I don't think that he should have been put to death. I don't believe he was guilty. I'm not fully convinced he had anything to do with it. I think that once a liar, always a liar. And because of his background, because of things prior, no one's ever going to believe anything. So even if he was pounding us on the head with the truth, we would still doubt it and find reasons not to believe it. I think that somehow he subconsciously knew it was the beginning of the end for him, and that he was fighting a war he already lost.
I mean, to your point though, and the one thing that I didn't bring up, why when you're on your deathbed and 3 people asked you, why wouldn't you just come clean? Because you want to die with that dignity or because you didn't do it?
And don't forget, they offered him life with the possibility of parole, and he said no, knowing if you say no, it's the death penalty, and he still said no. That speaks volumes to me. He could have been guilty as all get out and been like, possibility of parole, I'll be a good boy in prison, fine, I'm alive. It speaks volumes to me when someone's life is on the line, and when you're in a state like Texas and you know without a doubt, honey, we'll kill you tomorrow. You can confess to this, 3 meals in a cot for 20 years. We'll talk to you then. If you're a good boy, we'll set you free. And he said no. Because that had nothing to do with Hernandez. It had nothing to do with any other bad boy or gang members. This was your sentence. You don't have to tell us about anything else with any other suspect. You're not throwing anybody under the bus to get another kind of death sentence. That speaks very loud to me. We talked about things tonight that as a group, I'm not sure that we ever really discussed. I was so interested in what your all's reactions were going to be to this. And I'm also interested in the listeners may think. And so I'm asking the listeners to write, let us know what you all think. I would love to have that feedback. What I do hate about this case is all the main characters, for lack of better words, are gone. And I'm not sure that we'll ever know the full truth. And so all there's really left to do is to just speculate.
We don't want you to miss any of our future recordings. Please take this time now to subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can find us also on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or TikTok at SWACPod. That's SWACPOD. Or you can contact us via email for any questions, comments, or case ideas at swacpod@gmail.com. Thank you for speculating wildly with us tonight.